Solving quadratic equations with the quadratic formula. This formula will let you solve any quadratic equation. All you need to do is memorize the formula, fill it in, and then simplify. The formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. One way to remember this formula is to tell yourself this little story. A bad boy was trying to decide whether or not to go to a radical party or be square and miss out on 4 awesome chicks. It would all be over at 2 a.m. Now let's look at some examples. Anytime we use the quadratic formula, the right side of the equation has to be 0. So the first thing to do is to subtract 4 from both sides of the equation. We now have 2x squared minus 3x minus 11 equals 0. A is 2, B is negative 3, C is negative 11. Now fill in the formula. B is negative 3, A is 2, and C is negative 11. First simplify negative 3 for positive 3. Now look under the square root symbol. Negative 3 squared is positive 9. All perfect squares are positive. Now look at the multiplication. Count the negatives. An even number of negatives is positive. There are 2 negatives, so we get a positive. 4 times 2 times 11 is 88. The bottom of the fraction is 2 times 2 for 4. The answer then is 3 plus or minus the square root of 97 over 4. The square root of 97 cannot be simplified, so our two answers are 3 plus the square root of 97 over 4 and 3 minus the square root of 97 over 4. Every time we start using the quadratic formula, the first thing to do is make sure the right side of the equation is 0. In this case, add 8 to both sides of the equation. We now have 7x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. A equals 7, B equals negative 2, and C equals negative 3. Now rewrite the quadratic formula, but replace A, B, and C with parentheses. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now fill in a, b, and c. b is negative 2. A is 7. C is negative 3. Negative 2 is positive 2. Now look under the square root. The perfect square is always positive. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. In the multiplication, there's an even number of negatives, which makes a positive. 4 times 7 times 3 is 84. Now for the denominator, 2 times 7 is 14. We now have 2 plus or minus the square root of 88 divided by 14. We can simplify this first by simplifying the square root. The square root of 88 can be simplified to the square root of 4 times the square root of 22, which in turn can be simplified to 2 times the square root of 22. We now have 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 22 over 14. Finally, we can simplify again if all 3 of the numbers outside the square root have a common factor. These 3 numbers, 2, 2, and 14, all have the common factor 2. Divide 2 by 2 and we get 1. Divide 2 square root of 22 by 2 and we get 1 square root of 22. Divide 14 by 2 and we get 7. So the final answer is 1 plus the square root of 22 over 7 and 1 minus the square root of 22 over 7. Now pause the video and try the next example yourself. Now that you have tried it, check your work. First add 3 to both sides of the equation. We now have negative x squared plus 2x plus 3 equals 0. A is -1, B is 2, C is 3. Now rewrite the quadratic formula with parentheses in place of the letters. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now fill in the values. B is 2, A is -1, and C is 3. Now simplify. X equals -2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 12 all over -2. This turns into -2 plus or minus the square root of 16 over -2, which is -2 plus or minus 4 over -2. So we can find two answers. -2 plus 4 over -2 equals 2 over -2, or -1. -2 minus 4 over -2 is -6 over -2, or +3. So our two answers are -1 and +3. In this example, we're going to start by adding 12x to both sides of the equation. Now subtract 2 from both sides of the equation. We have 6x squared plus 12x minus 2 equals 0. A equals 6, B equals 12, C equals -2. Now rewrite the quadratic formula. -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. B equals 12, A equals 6, and C equals -2. Now we have x equals -12 plus or minus the square root of 144 plus 48 all over 12, for -12 plus or minus the square root of 192 over 12. We can simplify the square root of 192. The square root of 192 equals the square root of 64 times the square root of 3, which is 8 times the square root of 3. So our answer is -12 plus or minus 8 times the square root of 3 over 12. Now look for a common factor between the three numbers that are outside the square root. There is a common factor. It is 4. Divide each number by 4. -12 divided by 4 is -3. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. The final answer then is -3 plus 2 square root of 3 over 3 and -3 minus 2 square root of 3 over 3. Now pause the video and try the last one yourself. Now that you have tried it, check your work. Start by subtracting 6x from both sides of the equation. X squared minus 6x minus 5 equals 0. A equals 1, B equals -6, C equals -5. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. B equals -6, A equals 1, C equals -5. Thus we have x equals +6 plus or minus the square root of 36 plus 20, all divided by 2. This is 6 plus or minus the square root of 56 divided by 2. The square root of 56 can be simplified. The square root of 4 times the square root of 14, which equals 2 times the square root of 14. Thus we have 6 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 14 over 2. Now look at the three numbers outside the square root. They have a common factor, which is 2. Divide each by 2 to simplify. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Thus the final answer is 3 plus the square root of 14, and 3 minus the square root of 14. Please continue to refer to these notes as you complete your homework. Thank you.